Trying to figure out what's needed to replace things in an old Ampeg can be fun because there's the schematic and then there's what actually left the factory. And they're not always or rarely the same thing. For instance, all the schematics for the Gemini ones show 70 microfarad, 40, 40, 40 for these caps. So 70, 40, 40, 40. Well, this 70 microfarad has got this 20 microfarad in parallel with it. So they were doing closer to 100 for this. I don't know whether that was a change made to this model for a time, or whether that was something that they did on just the ones that might have had some kind of hum problem. And faster than troubleshooting what they'd done in their build, they just slapped in another filter cap. So I will bear that in mind as I go forward. I've got to remove some stuff to be able to see where things are. All right, when I got the old can cap out, the phenolic which held the can cap in place was all kind of chipped and cracking. So I put a new phenolic wafer in, which will accept a new 4-section can cap that I've got on order, or I will have tomorrow when the order can get placed. You can see here I've got a new cable gland here to hold the new power cable. More on the connections to come, but the old style Heiko clamp, which kind of just compresses the cable in one area and kind of it's tricky, just would not work with the larger diameter cable for a 3 conductor. So I put in this modern Heiko cable gland, which compresses it evenly from all sides. I much prefer these whenever possible. All right, before you would have seen one large cap mounted kind of here, going to ground here, and then I had 2 red wires coming off to here and here. That's been replaced with these 2 F&Ts. I ran some more wire here to extend this little bit of a ground area. It is functionally equivalent, good quality stuff, no problem there. New power cable here with the black hot going to the inner connector on the fuse, and then from there it goes to the power switch and then to one of the primaries. The other side of that power switch is doing a ground thing related to the pilot lamp, and the neutral, this white, is going to this eyelet where the other primary wire of the power transformer is connected. Before, they had something which is not on any of the schematics for the various Gemini amps that they made, and it's kind of crazy. What they did was they had, there's only 2 wires coming from the plug. And on this one, the black one's hot and the white one's neutral. On the other one, it doesn't really have a hot or neutral because the plug itself had no polarity. You could put it in the outlet either way. So it was, 50-50 whether you got hot or neutral based on what's coming out of the wall. One side of it, which we would normally consider the neutral, was referenced to ground right here through a capacitor. They had a capacitor here between, let's call it the neutral coming in from the wall, and ground, though I've removed the ground wire that used to be there. And so there was a ground reference to chassis on the neutral at all times, and the hot went straight to the other primary. And then the other primary, which here is connected to neutral, was actually going to this switch, the power switch, which would then, the other side of which was at chassis ground. So what it was doing was it was having the neutral always floating, having a floating reference to chassis through a capacitor, and then you would turn the amp on by referencing the associated primary of the power transformer to actual ground rather than the floating ground. And that's all well and good as long as that capacitor is working, but those capacitors don't always work. They begin to fail, and if that capacitor were to fail as a short, which is not uncommon, then you would have had a direct connection from the hot or neutral of the outlet, depending on which way the plug was put in, to chassis. And if you had a 50-50 shot, if you connected the hot from the wall to chassis, this entire thing would be live. Terrible, terrible. So I'm switching the hot through the fuse holder to the power switch, switching the hot to the primary, and the neutral is always connected to the other primary. This is going to be much safer and much more quiet. This white wire here is the heater center tap. And it was also going to chassis ground through a capacitor. Ampeg did that a lot. It's a great way to have a noisy, unreliable heater center tap reference. I've left this wire connected to this eyelet just to make sure it doesn't float around inside the chassis. But the capacitor has been removed, and I'm going to put an artificial center tap from the output tube heater connections to the cathode, which is at an elevated voltage. And here you can see one of the replaced cathode bypass caps. This is the one for that output tube cathode. It's a small cap, but it's 63 volts, very nice quality. And over here you can see I've already reflowed those solder joints that are beginning to crack. Let's move it on down the line. Down here you can see the other cathode bypass caps that I've changed out, including one here peeking at you. Pretty straightforward stuff. Once I get the multi-section can cap installed, and I'll change out the cable going to the foot switch, then I'll be able to play this and see if it's all working correctly. Now, Ampeg from this era, there are two main things that happen. Number one, the ground schemes are crappy. Many times on these Geminis and reverb rockets and things from this era, I've got to say, all right, that's what they did, and they have a hum as a result because that was a dumb thing to do. So I may make some further changes to the ground scheme. I've done that a lot. None of that changes the vintage sound of the amp. It just keeps you the vintage sound of the amp that you want and gets rid of all the noise and yuck in the background. Number two, there's the amp that exists on the schematic, and there's the amp that actually left the factory. And I have seen an awful lot of Ampegs from this era where, say, I'm not saying this is the case, but say this is a .047 cap. Someone might have grabbed a .0047 and stuck it in there. Same for this .022. There's the part that's supposed to be in there, the part that someone actually grabbed on the line on that particular day. I've seen just crazy variations on what left the factory. And sometimes that sounds good, and sometimes it doesn't. And sometimes, if you draw it out, it makes no sense. So a lot of the ones I've worked on in the past, I've had to go through and say, oh, this was a Friday amp. All these 10 nanofarads need to be 100 nanofarads or whatever. So that's what I'll get to once I can play it and listen to it and really go through and analyze what was built versus what was planned. It's not like back in the golden day, things were perfect. This is not Tolkien. In days of old, men knew such craft and lore which has been lost. These were built really cheaply and quickly in a factory in New Jersey by people just like you and me. And some of them are great, and some are built by clock watchers. So once I can power this on, I'll know whether it's a clock watcher or a great one. Either way, before I call this done, it will be a great example.